In the late 19th century, as Chicago prepared to dazzle the world with the 1893 World's Fair, a dark man was very busy with a more sinister plan. H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, was behind the reception desk attending to a true castle of horror, a hotel that he designed himself, where guests could check in, but never check out. This is the story of the man behind the Murder Castle. Born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, a man who would become H. Holmes showed signs of darker tendencies from a young age. Despite excelling academically, he was bullied by his peers and reportedly exhibited cruelty towards animals and smaller children. Some accounts even suggest he may have been responsible for the death of a childhood friend. At 16, Holmes graduated high school and began working as a teacher. He married Clara Lovering in 1878 at just 19 years old, and the couple had a son in 1880. But domestic life didn't suit the ambitious young man, so in 1879 he enrolled at the University of Vermont, only to leave after a single year. He then entered the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery in 1882, graduating in 1884. It was during his time in medical school that Holmes first dipped his toes into the world of crime. He developed a morbid obsession with cadavers. He began stealing them from the anatomy lab, disfiguring them, and then planting the bodies to make it appear as though they had died in accidents. He'd take out policies on fictitious people, use the altered corpses as evidence of their deaths, and collect their payouts. This ghoulish scheme was just the beginning of his life of crime. After graduating, Holmes moved to Moore Forks, New York, where rumors quickly spread about his involvement in the disappearance of a young boy. Though Holmes claimed the child had returned to Massachusetts, no investigations took place, and Holmes swiftly left town. But this pattern of strange disappearances would haunt him wherever he went. In 1886, Holmes changed his name to Henry Howard Holmes, or H. Holmes for short, likely to distance himself from his growing list of fraudulent activities. He moved to Chicago with his second wife, Myrta Belknap, despite still legally being married to Clara, and began working at the drugstore owned by Dr. Elizabeth S. Holton. His charm and work ethic impressed the Holtons, and when Dr. Holton fell ill, Holmes offered to buy the store. Mrs. Holton agreed, allowing Holmes to make payments over time. With the drugstore as his base, Holmes set his sight on the empty lot across the street. It was here that he would construct the building that would become known as the Murder Castle. But how could a man of limited means finance such an ambitious project? Holmes employed a series of fraudulent tactics to build his three-story structure. He hired multiple construction crews, firing them before they could complete their work and refusing to pay them, citing poor craftsmanship. He obtained materials on credit, hiding them from suppliers when they came to collect payment. Through these underhanded methods, Holmes managed to erect his building without paying a single cent. As the building neared completion in 1891, Holmes began advertising for lodgers, particularly young women. He also placed ads presenting himself as a wealthy man seeking a wife. Strangely, of all Holmes' employees, some hotel guests, fiancés, and wives were required to have life insurance policies with Holmes himself listed as the beneficiary. Not suspicious at all. Believe it or not, people bought into it. Who wouldn't trust a well-dressed, wealthy man who owned a big building? Because from the outside, it looked nice. It had shops downstairs, rooms upstairs. It seemed prestigious, but inside, that was a whole different story. It hid dark secrets that only came out years later. The second floor was a confusing maze of horrors, designed to trap innocent people. Imagine walking through a corridor that seemed to lead nowhere, opening a door only to find brick wall behind it. Picture yourself in a soundproofed room, unaware that you're being watched through hidden peepholes. These were just some of the terrifying features of Holmes's castle. Some rooms were connected to gas lines, giving him the ability to asphyxiate his victims at will. If you think that's awful, wait until you hear what's next, because it was in the basement where Holmes's true evil was revealed. Investigators later found a blood-stained dissection table, vats of acid, a crematorium, and tools for torture. In this grim workshop, Holmes disposed of his victims' bodies, often stripping them down to skeletons that he sold to medical schools. Unfortunately, all of this wasn't discovered until it was terribly late. By that time, all anyone could tell was that the hotel had started operating around the same time that people began to disappear. The first known victims were likely Julia Smythe Connor and her daughter Pearl. Julia was the wife of one of Holmes' employees and had begun an affair with Holmes. Around Christmas of 1891, both Julia and Pearl vanished without a trace. Holmes would later claim that Julia had died during an abortion. But surely, we shouldn't rely on the word of a killer, so the truth about what happened to the mother and the daughter remains unknown. As the 1893 World's Fair approached, Holmes added a third floor to his building, telling investors he planned to use it as a hotel for fair visitors. However, this hotel was never completed. Instead, furniture suppliers discovered that Holmes was hiding their unpaid-for materials in secret rooms and passages throughout the building. Even so, during the World's Fair, Holmes' hotel was open for business, and he actively sought out victims amongst the throngs of tourists flooding into Chicago. He would charm wealthy women, lure them back to his building, and they would never be seen again. The true number of his victims during this period is unknown, but estimates suggest that as many as 50 people were reported missing during the fair, were last traced to Holmes' castle. As the police closed in, Holmes fled Chicago. He traveled across the country, continuing his schemes and leaving a trail of victims in his wake. One of his most infamous crimes during this period was the murder of his business partner, Benjamin Pitezel, and 3 of the Pitezel children. In 1984, Holmes convinced Pitezel to participate in an insurance scam that would involve faking Pitezel's death. But Holmes had no intention of letting his partner live. Instead of finding a suitable cadaver as planned, Holmes murdered Pitezel. He knocked him out with chloroform and set his body on fire. He then manipulated Pitezel's wife into allowing him to take 3 of 5 of their children on a trip across the country. What followed was a twisted game of cat and mouse. Holmes led Mrs. Pitezel on a parallel journey, always keeping her just out of reach of her children. All the while, he was spinning lies about her husband's whereabouts, claiming that Pitezel was hiding in London. The fate of the Pitezel children would prove to be one of the most heartbreaking chapters in Holmes' reign of terror. 2 of the girls, Alice and Nellie, met their end in Toronto. Holmes forced them into a large trunk, drilled a hole in its side, and attached a gas line. The girls' decomposing bodies were later found buried in the cellar of a house Holmes had rented. The youngest child, Howard, met an even more gruesome fate in Indianapolis. Holmes rented a cottage and visited a local pharmacy to purchase drugs. He then took the boy to a repair shop to sharpen some knives. What happened next can only be described as nightmarish. Holmes killed the child, dismembered the body, and burned the remains in the cottage's chimney. When investigators later searched the property, they found nothing but the boy's teeth and small bone fragments. As the net began to close around him, Holmes fled from city to city, always staying one step ahead of the law. But his luck finally ran out in November 1894, when he was arrested in Boston on an outstanding warrant for horse theft in Texas. Once in custody, Holmes initially tried to maintain his innocence, claiming to be nothing more than an insurance fraudster. But as the evidence mounted against him, his stories began to change. He gave conflicting accounts of his life and crimes, at times claiming innocence, at others suggesting he was just possessed by Satan. With all this, the trial was a show, a circus. Holmes himself chose to act his own attorney. It was almost as if the matter wasn't taken seriously. Of course, he failed miserably. He admitted to killing 27 people, though some estimates put the number of his victims as high as 200. But during the trial, he was only found guilty of the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, and for that he was sentenced to death. The chosen day to carry out this sentence was May 7, 1896, on the gallows of Philadelphia. Despite knowing it was his end, H. Holmes remained calm and composed, showing little fear or remorse. But life and justice are poetic, at least sometimes, and his execution did not go as planned. The trapdoor failed to break his neck, leaving him to slowly strangle to death over a course of 15 agonizing minutes. The sinister figure of H. Holmes has vanished forever, but strangely, his shadows would continue to captivate for years to come. His infamous murder castle in Chicago became a source of intense public fascination. Tourists flocked to the site, eager to glimpse at the place where so many horrors had unfolded. In August 1895, under mysterious circumstances, the building caught fire. 2 men were seen entering and quickly leaving before explosions rocked the structure and it burned down. One might think that would be the end of it, But it wasn't. In more recent years, in 2017, rumors began to swirl that Holmes had somehow escaped death and avoided execution. His body was exhumed for testing. Over 120 years had passed, yet his cement-encased coffin had preserved his remains eerily well. His clothes nearly intact, even his mustache remained. DNA testing confirmed the body was indeed his. The rumors were put to rest. And H.H. Holmes went down in history as America's first serial killer. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button, comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more chilling tales that have stained history with blood. Until next time.